brands with the biggest impact stand out because of their passion. These gifted creators inspire and motivate without even trying. But because of how we interpret their work ethic, we get left out of this beautiful gift. It seems like our idols know something we don't, but the reality is we're the only ones capable of perceiving the truth. We know the trenches. We know what it's like to have no hope, and because of this, we stay in this spot for it's all we've known. Most never break out, but if we want a chance at the top, we must understand a simple concept that artists think they know, but as time goes on, we're taught to ignore. It all starts with hitting rock bottom. The last few months has felt like I lost my passion. It felt like everything I've been doing was boring, and even though I was making progress, it still felt like I was getting nowhere with my work. I didn't know what was wrong and assumed it was because I wasn't working hard enough. I listened to that typical advice, but that made the issue even worse. I ended up deciding to quit. I was burnt out, exhausted, and had nowhere to go. Yet, it was exactly this moment where the information I really needed was given to me. The realization struck me. It was so obvious, but I finally realized that all the hard work I was doing was exactly what was taking away from my art. And it's exactly what was holding me back from raising my standards as a creator. How could I make better work when I was too busy focusing on the work in the first place? Steven Pressfield describes this effect in his book, The War of Art. And it made me remember that you can't treat creative work like it's an office job. You can't treat it like a business, even though it really is. It's a balance. We forget to realize that the entrepreneurs giving this advice are oftentimes working with a huge team, and they themselves are doing boring, rinse and repeat work. This just doesn't apply to artists in their creative process. And this hard work ignores the fact that there are just one or two tasks that will push you forward the most, which, more often than not, don't take as long as we think. Over time, I got my passion back, and I was creating better work than I ever had before. But even then, there still was something missing. Passion wasn't the answer. There's a big piece missing that we forget to realize.
When I sit down to work on a problem, I know I don't know where I'm going. So to go in a straight line, to be efficient, efficiency and invention are sort of at odds, because invention, real invention, that requires wandering, and you have to give yourself permission to wander.
When we take breaks or get less motivated, we fail to understand that the gaps in progress are trying to tell us something. We can't even begin to understand because to not work means that we failed. There's something we learn to ignore through even more hard work, and the thing is, the breaks and times we feel like we need to be more productive are the times when we're actually productive. These are the times we come into contact with the parts of ourselves that were ignored and need to be improved. And oftentimes, this immense hard work we place on ourselves is only meant to ignore the parts of ourselves we're desperately trying to hide. Rather than things being a natural progression, Deleuze describes progression in a rhizomatic, random way. Random things you do pop up and give you experiences that will push you forward. All areas of life are vital. Rather than one step taking you to the next, everything you do takes you towards the progression of a better next video, creation, or direction, which in turn leads to a better life. Everything is a metaphor, and if you could see it, that's power. Building a business or even a brand as an artist isn't just about making money or improving your art. It's about improving yourself. Every problem we face in our businesses is an extension of a personal problem simply because we're the ones building that business. We have a problem taking criticism in the comment section, then this is a personal confidence issue. We get sidetracked easily. We must learn to ignore novelty and continue in the boring parts of sitting down and creating every day. But as soon as we sit down, we'll understand the great environment we're creating. I read somewhere that our creative spaces are an extension of the divine, and this makes a lot of sense to me. If you've ever entered someone's space where they punch in or where they sit down to design, you can see this feeling. And as long as we show up here and know that this is our territory, much like Schwarzenegger in the gym, we'll see the progress we hope to see. The issue I'm facing now that you might relate to is a lack of identity. It might stem from schizophrenia or whatever, but the solution is the same. For me at least, I think it's self-acceptance. Understanding that the things around me are extensions of me. I have to learn to embrace myself in order to move forward, in order to serve my audience and care for my family and friends close to me. But the funny thing is, I would have only been able to recognize this and actually understand its significance for myself through my channel. I realized I had so many different styles of videos, so many different thumbnail styles, skills and copying other people's work simply because I wasn't trusting in the vision I've developed for myself over the years of work I've created. For some reason, I had to go through all these different formats to learn that. I think that was the point of it. Some people are just naturally gifted and can learn easily, but for a lot of us, I think these repetitions are much more important. With each repetition, we learn something, and we may not recognize it now, but in due time, that lesson and experience will show its face, leading to a great foundation for our success. And I think this is a big problem with the perfectionist mindset. When we're young, we haven't put the reps in to even deserve this mentality. We haven't gone through enough shit in our own process to even begin to understand what perfection looks like. We haven't been gifted the iayze. We don't even belong there. But there will come a time when you naturally begin to pull back, you create less, but when you do release your work into the world, it's your best. This is when we naturally will adopt that mindset, and it serves us because we naturally learned it. But in our businesses, and by extension, our lives, we force realizations and thought processes from others because we consume so much content. We can only learn through our own experience, and in hindsight, we have to go back to our foundation countless times because we forced our progress. But in reality, we haven't progressed at all. Well, we have, but you'll see why in a second. But I think it's important to take any advice with a grain of salt because everyone is so different in their process that they'll naturally do business and even art a different and unique way. This is why the idea that our brands are extensions of ourselves is so important because we won't know how to run a business if we don't know ourselves. If we understand who we are, and especially our genetic talents, we'll be able to optimize and run our businesses in a way that will lead to longevity. We won't get burnt out because the business is just us being us. One thing I want to say here too is that content can be great as well. There's two sides to every coin, but if we don't understand why, we'll be running in circles. And I think the reason content can be so powerful is because it is what we interpret reality through. It is the same for art and movies as well. It's what allows us to feel. It's what gives us empathy and emotions. And oftentimes, the people that shelter themselves from powerful movies and music are emotionless. This was me for a time. There was so much going on in my head that I couldn't even begin to understand. I took on the identity of the guy that doesn't watch any movies. But later down the road, watching movies was one of the best things I could have done. Tell me if you can relate, but sometimes we'll be pulled to certain pieces of content because there's something we need to learn from it. There's a piece of ourselves waiting to be unlocked in that movie that if we ignore it, we'll miss out on an important realization. It's funny. Sometimes I'll just be presented with the answer to an issue through the algorithm. I'm convinced that they can read my brainwaves, but this is when we take that new information and lead our lives in a way that leans into our natural identity. But how do we know what is actually us versus things we adopt to ignore our authentic selves? I think it helps to understand resistance. When there's something we need to do, we often take other routes to ignore that thing. And this is where the mask presents itself to us. We can adopt a fake persona to ignore something that we really want to do. We want to be more personable? Well, we'll stay inside and not go out. We want to create great art, we'll force ourselves to work all day so we don't have the energy to do so. And I think it helps to understand the two sides of identity. The first is how we see ourselves in the mirror, and the other is the environment we place ourselves in to further this identity. The scary part is, sometimes we'll place ourselves in an environment just so we get stuck. It's a symptom of resistance. But when we elevate as people, we'll naturally want to leave this environment. Think about a part-time job. I used to work at a pizza place. For some reason, I needed to be there. Then when there's something I know unconsciously, I leave the job because I no longer either identify with that place or I learned what I needed to. I think a great way to understand this is through viral creators. The reason why they don't work a job on the side is oftentimes because of their identity. Not even because they make enough money online, but because they can't relate to the people there for one, but also it's baked into the role of a successful creator that they don't go to college or work on the side. It is expected of them not to do these things. But what happens when we ignore these roles and embrace our natural desires? This is where we get to true invention, from wandering and getting to what we want most. This is also a good way of tracking the problems and solutions in our lives. If we can move fast enough, we'll move through different places and creators because we found the answer to something. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. But when the student is truly ready, the teacher disappears. But there's a powerful story of how Buddha reached enlightenment. He was in and out of fasting for a long time, and he looked like he was dying because he was literally just skin and bones. Eventually, a young woman offered him a bowl of rice pudding. She just wanted to help because he looked so frail and in need of food. It was at this moment Buddha decided to give up on his enlightenment. He had been fasting so long, and he believed that his fasting would force him into an enlightened state. But when it didn't, he was disappointed and decided to break his fast with the pudding. As he broke his fast, he realized that you can't get to an enlightened state by desiring it, by forcing your way to the outcome, but by being neutral and allowing the different states of life to ebb and flow from your natural actions. He let go of what he wanted, and it was only then that he got what he desired. He reached enlightenment, and only at that point, this enlightenment to him lost its fantastical color and became something that was simply a standard of life. I'm not trying to do the disaster of comparing myself to Buddha or his stories, but I had a very similar experience on YouTube. The moment I felt like nothing was working and I decided to give up was the moment I realized how far I've come. It was the moment I realized I was actually way closer to my goals than I thought. But because I was so ingrained in my work, I just couldn't see it. All I could see was the negatives of my experience, and the only way out of that was to give up, take a seat back from my ego of having to be a great YouTuber, and see that I actually have been making great videos. But I didn't force this realization. It came to me after months of no progress and deciding to give up naturally. And it was at this point where my videos immediately increased in quality because I no longer took it seriously. I wasn't grinding all day, trying desperately to get my next video out, and I was able to raise my standard for my videos because I wasn't working as hard. Making videos was just a part of who I was, so I still kept going, but with a newfound passion and standard that I didn't have before. You see, the problem with this work harder advice, or the advice to just keep going, is that it teaches us to lower our standards. We force ourselves to put out lower quality work because it means we're working harder. But it's our best work that pushes us forward the most. The work that pushes us the hardest. The work that's the hardest to sit down and actually create. So why not only release the best work? We work harder, we stress ourselves out, and we eventually lose all desire for what we love most. We burn out, but it is at this point where an opportunity arises. Either we push harder and dig ourselves into a deeper hole, or we take a break, even give up, and the most important realization is offered to us to take. If we accept it, we can move forward. But until we finally accept it, we will keep getting stuck at the same point over and over again. The moment of despair and burnout will repeat itself until we're no longer too stubborn to ignore it. But why is hard work such an important topic of discussion? And why does it seem to work for most people?
Stress primarily comes from not taking action over something that you can have some control over. So if I find that some particular thing is causing me to have stress, that's a warning flag for me. What it means is there's something that I haven't completely identified, perhaps in my conscious mind, that is bothering me, and I haven't yet taken any action on it. As soon as I identify it and make the first phone call or send off the first email message or whatever it is that we're going to do to start to address that situation, even if it's not solved, the mere fact that we're addressing it dramatically reduces any stress that might come from it. So stress comes from ignoring things that you shouldn't be ignoring.
Do you notice anything interesting here? This goes directly against the typical advice we're often given online. In my experience, and I'm sure Jeff Bezos would agree, I think there needs to be a balance. Over the years, we have to have developed the skills to be able to work like a maniac when we need to. But we also need to be confident enough to sit back and relax when the time calls for it. And I think this is what hard work really is, at least to me. Hard work is living your life through the lens of what you want most. It means experimenting and going out and having experiences, and letting these experiences show you where you need to improve in your business or goals, or even as a person. To me, sitting back and relaxing is hard work, just as much as grinding out my next video or staying up all night working. It's yin and yang. It's the two sides of the coin. Both sides are needed to even be able to understand what each one is. By contrast, we can understand what each season of our lives calls for, what each day and minute calls for. But we need to be in tune with our feeling and unconscious desires. It's hard, but it's very simple if we can learn to forget the many ways we distort and manipulate reality. Even with this video, it's very hard because I was feeling like I needed to work harder. It's been over a week since my last video, and all I have is the hook barely edited. But sometimes there's something we need to learn. There's something we haven't experienced yet that we need to see in order to push forward. The typical advice tells us to overcome resistance, but I think it's this resistance that teaches us the most. We keep procrastinating, and then one day it all clicks. You have the experience you need to have, and all of the sudden, the entire script writes itself in less than an hour. You don't even have to try. And I think this is the most authentic. This leads to the best results for me because creative work is very much based on feeling. I find that anytime I force myself to work, the work is dull and bland. And when I finally allow myself to sit back, that's when the best work comes to me because I'll naturally start working after a powerful experience. But again, I'm almost uncomfortable putting this into a video because this comes off the back of years of reps in design, editing, filming, and making videos. I've done so much over the years, and obviously there's so much more to be done, but I am finally realizing this for myself because I've done all the work of being able to write a good script and create a good video. I can sit back because I finally earned it, or at least I think I did. But just last month, I was making a bad video every week or so, grinding every day, and after this point was when I finally got my videos to the point they needed to be at. Maybe the script was bad for one video, maybe the editing was passionless, but either way, each video I learned something that I needed to hear. And now my foundation is better built, and until I reach my next ceiling that needs immense work to get past, I can work at my own pace. Hard work eliminates passion. With all this struggle to create, we lose the desire to create in the first place. It becomes boring and dull because there's no challenge. We allow ourselves to just do whatever and we get bored. We lose passion and we lose progress. One day, you'll wake up and realize your passion is back. You are more energized than ever before, your stress is gone, and the work you're creating has become your best ever.
They get me high, rolling on phones, no more flick spliff. Put that shit in the sky. I fear if I ice on my wrist, shit, I might go losing track of the time. I fear if I